Hey, so welcome to episode 4. So this is our long form or slightly longer form version of the podcast. We had a listener call in or write in asking for tips on how to start their own practice in this world that we live in, 2024. I think it's kind of interesting to think about how it used to be to build a practice and start one, but the environment, like we talked about in our last episode, from a financial perspective, from all kinds of considerations, is changing in medicine. So now may be one of the toughest times to start your practice. So what are some things you need to consider when you're starting a practice so that you get off on the right foot?
Let's take a step back. Why would somebody want to start a practice versus why would somebody want to join a practice?
Right. So I think a person who would want to start their own practice is an entrepreneur. They have that kind of spirit where they feel confident in their ability to offer the highest level of care in a customized way that fits their own priorities. And they like to be the boss. They don't want to have to answer to any other person besides, I guess, regulators and the government. They just want to dictate these changes with the acknowledgement that it's going to be a lot more work. Whereas joining a practice that's established saves you so much headache because they figured out how to hire, how to bill, how to organize your schedule. Everything you can think of when you go to a doctor's office, they've pretty much figured out. Now, you can improve on those things always, but they've taken a lot of that weight off of you. But now you've lost some of that autonomy, and you will have a boss. And so nowadays, I think younger folks starting out tend to lean towards employment, either with a hospital system or what have you. And there's data on this. It's from Medical Economics. And again, I will send this to you. It's an article from July of 2023 talking about the number of folks that are in private practice and are shifting towards practices that are owned by hospitals. So talk about having a boss. You have a really big boss, someone who runs a hospital who may not even know anything about your particular specialty or whatever. It's just about the money. So those are the trade-offs to me.
Right. So the audience here is anybody who's a physician in training, medical student, resident, or even a physician in practice who's typically probably been in practice less than 10 years. They are kicking around the idea of, do I want to be my own boss and do things my way, or do I want to join a organization that already has built-in infrastructure, and so I don't have to get my hands dirty with all the day-to-day operations.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly. So, or even if you're an undergrad and you're thinking about medicine, this might be worth your time because you should have the big picture before you go into medicine. The field is changing. There's a lot of different ways things can go, and you should know what kind of jobs will likely be available to you, and kind of try to set yourself up from an early point for success. Say if I wanted to do solo practice, I start thinking about these things, learning while I'm in medical school, instead of waiting till the very end and just teeing everything up. Because the pathway to get employed by an existing thing is easy, but I think not easy, but it's a system. There's already, everything's in place, like you said. The opposite, the solo practice is all on you. So you're going to have to really do your homework ahead of time.
I would say anybody who's in solo practice, they have to do, on average, more work than somebody who is employed.
Yes.
Now, that depends on that individual's desire to work. Because if you're in solo practice, I know, for example, in Austin, doctors who are in solo practice, they actually just have one staff member. So they are satisfied with a very, very, very simple model, and that is not built to see a lot of patients. But if you want to grow an enterprise, you will eventually have to learn a lot more detail about leadership, hiring, staffing, HR, all the equipment and real estate concerns, office concerns. If the office is too hot or too cold, or if there's a roof leak, it's on you. Mm-hmm. Property management, a lot. Mm-hmm. So
you're running a very high, like the highest version of a restaurant. You know, you have all this overhead, you have customers, you have to rent a space. The advantage is the reimbursement is higher, obviously, for physicians than, say, a restaurant, like your expected return. But the initial investment, the initial cost is much higher, but the long-term overall growth potential, as it is now, is greater. You should cancel out if you tough it out and you do the right things, you do right by your patients. It's just you have to be willing to accept it's going to be very tough.
There's this saying, there's a price to pay for everything. So there's a price to pay for somebody else managing, and there's a price to pay if you're the manager. But there's no free lunch along the way. Yeah, there's no perfect, like I see some of these people on social media saying, oh, I'm a boss, and so look, I've made it. It's good, but it's just a lot of work. So anybody can be the boss. They just have to be willing to put in the time and the sweat equity to do it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not just money. Like you said, it's sweat equity or your own time and effort. I actually spoke to some colleagues who are starting their practices or have started their practices recently to give us the modern context. So I spoke with Dr. Pierre Caticular out in Solano Beach, California. Anyway, he also goes by Dr. P. I remember all the folks at Bascom Palmer, a lot of the patients just calling him Dr. P. So perhaps that's what he'll use in Solano Beach. And then Dr. Diaz, Danny Diaz, who's in Miami. Both of these gentlemen do ophthalmology. They did ophthalmology residencies, but they diverged in their fellowship. So Dr. P is an oculoplastics person. He just finished up his fellowship at UCLA. And Dr. Diaz is a retina specialist who finished his fellowship, I think, about 4 years ago, is my recollection. So you get two different timestamps. One person who's just starting their practice. In fact, his first week at Chloe Eye is next week. So he's having his first patients. If you want to make an appointment, the phone number's there. And then Dr. Diaz, again, has been in practice, solo practice, for about 4 years. So you get a different version of a similar time period economically. And they shed a lot of light, to me at least, as someone who's never started a practice. The first thing I was thinking about, and we talked on this a little bit, is how do you pick a location? How do you negotiate for real estate? I haven't even yet bought a house, let alone buy a medical practice. Do you have any thoughts about, strategy for picking a location? Dr. Diaz shared that he mapped out, he printed out or looked on Google Maps and put every single retina practice on the map so he could triangulate and find an area that's underserved that he could capitalize on. I'm sure there's a lot of ways you can think about it. What are things you would think about if you were starting a solo practice?
First of all, if you're starting to look for a place to live and you're new to the area, does the average person go in and buy a home? Or does the average person go in and rent a place to live?
I think traditionally they would buy, but with the market changes, maybe rent.
Well,
because it was cheaper to buy a home previously. A little bit of both, probably rent.
I think most places, in fact, I would bet most physicians rent their space.
Yeah.
I would bet a minority of physicians own their space. It's expensive.
Yeah.
So if you think residential property is perhaps expensive based on location, commercial real estate is just the same thing. So most people, they're going to rent when they move into a new area for work and probably to live. So I don't think the question of purchasing real estate becomes important until the physician is more well established.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. So you're definitely renting. That makes sense. So where do you rent from? One thing they mentioned, and maybe you can speak to this, is there's prefabs, there's medical office buildings. You see them all across the country. These places, that's what they do. They help doctors get space to take care of patients. So they're experienced with that population of renters. I don't know. Did your old office, was that a MOB technically, the one on?
I'm just aware that most doctors, if I had to think about it, they're just not in a position to purchase their property. they will rent. It's just more efficient for them. In fact, there's an argument. Some people say that even for living, it's more efficient to rent than to own a home. Like a friend of mine said, he asked a question: is a home an investment? What do you think?
Well, you do develop equity. And so instead of just paying rent and it goes into nothing, I mean, it just goes into the hand of the landlord, you get to keep that equity so that when you sell it, assuming the property has appreciated value, that's a win for you.
In one way, that's an investment, which is accurate. But an investment also spins off revenue, income. And a house, which is a large investment, doesn't spin off any income. On the other hand, commercial real estate, if purchased, it is an investment because it does spin off income.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to take us down a buying rabbit hole.
No, these are considerations for anybody who's starting a business.
That's true.
Yeah.
So most folks are going to rent, and so you're going to have a landlord. And something I learned about, because I'm behind the 8 ball here a little bit, is that your landlord will help you a little bit when you're starting out. They will give you funds to help tenant improvement allowance to help you improve the quality of the building. That means they'll help you put up new walls, fix up the bathroom, paint, carpet, that kind of stuff. But they're not going to pay for your OCT or your furniture because those things, the equipment doesn't add value to the property, right? So they have to have a vested interest in this. It's not just free money. There is some sort of benefit for them. So that was something I didn't know. So that's something going into, you should really look into the rates that you can get back to cut down on your cost and really shift it over towards the owner of the property because it's their property. And then basically, once you're in that property renting and you're physically in it, you lose all your negotiating power. So try to be really upfront and aggressive. I mean, you don't want to lose the deal, right, if it's a good fit, but capitalize on that time was their recommendation.
But I would say even if I were a young physician renting, you would sign a lease agreement with a term.
Yes.
It could be 3 years, 5 years longer. But if you've been able, it's just like if you sign a lease agreement for an apartment, if it doesn't work out, you can always move on down the road when the lease expires, or if worst case scenario, you have to leave sooner, you just have to pay the terms of the lease to get out of it.
Do you happen to know, I don't know the answer to this, the typical terms for breaking a lease like that?
I'd have to look at the contracts, but there's always a penalty.
Sure.
There's always a financial penalty.
Sure.
So just that's something to consider, just the term of the lease, because things change. But if I were to go into practice and go to a new area, I would sign a lease for probably 2 to 3 years because that's how long it's going to take for me to ramp up and get good. And probably if I'm ambitious enough and work hard enough, I'll get busier and I will probably outgrow my space and I will need to expand.
Right.
I'll need more rooms. I'll need to have more space for people. And so I'll probably either have to occupy a different suite within the existing building, or I'll have to move to another location.
That's interesting. I mean, this is very specific to ophthalmologists, but if you were to rent, what do you think a good number of lanes, AKA rooms, do you think you would need as a solo practitioner? How many exam rooms?
I would start out, because you have to pay for the equipment, I would start out with probably not more than 3 lanes.
Okay.
And go from there, because when you're starting out, all you're doing is spending money on equipment and you've just got to generate the business. So I would just learn to max out the efficiency of 3 rooms. And that would probably hold me for at least, if I'm starting out from scratch,
right,
it would hold me for 3 years.
Okay.
At least. If you get ambitious, you can have 4 rooms and that would probably hold you for longer. But even in our own world where I joined an established practice, we got busy enough that we outgrew our space. So even in this building that we're at, we had a surgery center and we had 1 OR that's a whole nother discussion. But we had a surgery center. We had one OR, and we expanded it to 2, and still it was not enough space. So we had actually, if you get busy, which is the goal,
Right.
maybe it's the goal, maybe it's not. Maybe somebody just wants to kind of like pace along and have that one staff member. So everybody's ambition is different. But we wanted to get busier, so we outgrew our space and had to kind of expand.
What was your ratio of rooms to doctor? Maybe the rooms to doctor isn't the way to think about it, but do you feel like it was about 3 or 4 per doctor?
When
and that
I
was a rate?
When I think back to when I was at your stage, I had like 2 to 3 rooms.
Per doctor. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's probably pretty good.
So, so if I had my 3 lanes or rooms, would you have 1 tech room and then 2 exam rooms? So they get worked up, get their vision checked, all that in one room, and then they move them, or do they stay in the room?
Here's what I would do if I started out.
Yeah.
I would get space for 3 exam rooms, and I would purchase the equipment to furnish 1 room.
Oh,
Max out that 1 room, and then purchase the equipment for the second room once I've exceeded the capacity. And then I wouldn't. For example, we have 3 ORs in our ASC. Do we have equipment in all 3 ORs now?
just 2.
No, because we're not at that capacity. But we've built in the opportunity for future growth.
Interesting. Okay.
That's how I would do it.
Do you think though that you're losing out on like bulk cost on buying equipment, meaning you might get a better rate if you buy more things at once? I don't know.
Yes, but when you're starting out, money is scarce.
Yeah.
So, at least in the ophthalmology world, and you can buy used equipment or you can buy new equipment. There's pros and cons to each, just like buying a used car versus a new car. So I would estimate you pay half the price for the used equipment and full price for the new equipment. Yeah, I mean, and everybody does it differently, but if I would do something, I would try to get more modern, probably new equipment for 1 room, and it'll cost you like about $25,000 to furnish 1 ophthalmology exam room.
Yeah, we should be clear.
Yeah.
Ophthalmology is, and I have data from I didn't show it, but it's one of the most expensive practices from an overhead perspective. The amount of stuff you have to buy to deliver standard of care, eye care, is a lot.
Right.
It's very high. Think about your normal doctor's office.
Right.
They have a table and, I don't know, a reflex hammer. That's a blood pressure cuff. Right. It's not that much stuff, right? If you need an x-ray, maybe they have an x-ray in-house, but usually they just send you out. We need 5 different ways of measuring your eyes, at least, and they're all very expensive.
And you asked about the cost of equipment over time. When I go to the vendor for our exam room equipment, every year they go up in price. So although we now have unused rooms, that increase in price was really bothersome to me. So that's why all our exam rooms have equipment now, although we're not using every exam room. Because I realized, yes, I'm kind of like, I don't want to pay more next year.
Yeah.
That was just kind of like there's no right or wrong there, but that was my logic.
No, that makes sense. Another thing, just going back to the negotiations that they brought up, was a non-compete. So I wasn't familiar with this, but it makes sense. So let's say I want to rent a space in a medical office building for my ophthalmology practice. I do cataract and refractive. Well, it wouldn't be great if there's also another cataract and refractive doctor that's allowed to join that medical office building in the future. That could really cannibalize my business and make it very difficult to exist. So often you can negotiate a non-compete with them so that they will not add a similar style practice to the MOB without your permission. Of course, if they're a different kind of ophthalmologist, say a retina or a person or an oculoplastics, that is less likely to be an issue. In fact, it may be an asset for you. So then that would be an instance in which you would say, oh, no problem, come on in. So that was news to me. I didn't ever consider that, that you have to kind of be a little territorial, and that's okay. Make sure that that's included. I don't know. Let's see what else is worth talking about. So in terms of equipment, right, we kind of hinted at all these machines you need to get. If you are starting a bare bones cataract refractive practice, what kind of machines do you think you would need, and how much would you have to budget for that roughly, if you had to guess in 2024?
Just thinking out loud, if you bought everything new, you get an auto refractor, it's probably like $10,000.
Yeah.
You get a lensometer, you could get a manual lensometer or an automatic lensometer. Let's say it's $5,000. Then you may or may not want to get a retinal imaging system. That's between, if you want new stuff that's modern, you're looking at $100,000.
You're talking about an Optos camera is $100,000.
Right.
Yep.
If you're looking at getting a topographer, you're looking at probably in the range of $20,000, 20 to 30.
Yep.
If you're looking at like a biometer to measure for cataract surgery, LensStar, IOL Master, Argos, I haven't shopped them in a while, but I would imagine you're looking at $30,000 to $45,000. If you're looking at a pachymeter, you're probably looking at $2,000 to $4,000. If you're looking at an OCT, the state-of-the-art OCT, you're probably looking at roughly a new one, $100,000. What else is there? If you need to do LASIK, you would need to get a aberrometer. That could be in the range of about $50,000 to $75,000. Again, I haven't shopped that in a while. And then add on about $25,000 for new lane equipment. That's the chair, the stand, the light, the slit lamp, the tonometer, the stool.
So you get 2 rooms, hypothetically.
Yeah, then double that. Granted, there's a range. So if you're getting everything used, you could pay half.
And the used stuff is high. I mean, it's in good shape, right? They're servicing this equipment. They're not lemons, right? On average, you're gonna get a product that is reasonable.
It could be good. I mean, if I'm trying to get by on a very modest budget, I would have to get used. And I would go about it that way because I don't have the luxury of getting new.
Yeah.
Think about it. If you're trying to just get transportation, you're going to get a used car.
Yeah.
You're not going to, getting a new car is out of the question. You just need to get from point A to point B.
Right.
And hopefully you get busy enough that in the future you can upgrade things.
Yeah, I'd also think, I mean, this popped into my mind, maybe I get used A, but I get new B because I recognize that there's an advance in a technology. There's, to me, maybe I don't need the newest slit lamp from Hogstrite. The one from 20 years ago is very good, and I can just do that. But hey, that new aberrometer that syncs up with my LASIK machine, that I'm going to get new because I need that to be on point. So another way to think about it, you don't have to do all used, all new. You can strategize a little bit based on your practice.
And some of the lane equipment in ophthalmology lasts forever. Yeah. So I joined my dad in practice, and we had very old equipment, and it lasted forever until we finally kind of go, well, we can modernize it.
We had these chairs. This is a little just a trip down memory lane, but on the second floor, Baskin Palmer, that's where the residents used to have their clinic, and man, they had chairs from, I guess, around the time your dad's practice started, maybe a little earlier, 1963 or 61 or something is when Baskin was founded. And I mean, it looked like a Cadillac, this chair, the patient chair. It was Art Deco green or that teal color that everything is in Miami. And it was this big, looked like a big lazy boy couch. And you turn it on and it would, but it worked. I mean, it was 60 years old. It still worked. They didn't change it. And so this stuff lasts. So it's a good investment. Like it's gonna last you.
That's right.
At least the physical equipment you're gonna have to update your testing equipment probably more often, right?
And then when you get anything, just know that it will always eventually need service because it will break. So you'll have to establish relationships with the companies to get it serviced when it breaks.
The companies like the one you buy it from, or the individual companies that sell that? Both.
So we've even bought like some of our YAG lasers that we've used. We bought them used, and not everybody needs a YAG laser if they're doing ophthalmology. They don't need it in their own clinic. But anyway, we bought some used YAG lasers for our clinic, and to get them serviced, we had to contact the company who makes the laser, Zeiss, to establish a service contract with them to get it serviced and maintained. So whenever you pull the trigger on the laser, you know that it's safe.
Did they vet, just out of curiosity, does Zeiss come and kind of give it a once over before you can?
Yes.
They didn't even sell it to you. They're just servicing it. So they want to make sure before they take on this service contract, they didn't sell you like a ray gun or something.
Yes.
Okay.
It will charge you a little fee to inspect it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then just for those who were wondering, and maybe my math was a little wrong along the way, but the total cost of what he was just talking about, it was about $409,000 just for startup equipment cost. That's not the renting. That's not staff, anything else.
That's not the computers.
No.
It's not the electronic medical record software.
Right. So this is a lot of money. And that's on par with what I heard from Dr. P and Dr. Diaz, about $500,000 just for that stuff alone. And, they kind of said nowadays an ophthalmologist can expect a line of credit about $500,000 to $1.5 million is how much they'll give you for your startup. So that's a lot. So that, you're still good. You can get this equipment at the highest value and you still have room to breathe, but you're trying to run a lean practice. Be careful out there, I guess.
What kind of interest rate do you get on that line of credit?
Oh, I don't know. That's a good question. I
have no idea.
I don't know. I don't think a good one nowadays.
So that should incentivize the person who's starting their own practice if they're spending their own $400,000 or they've borrowed $400,000. That should incentivize them to work really hard.
Should.
Yeah.
I mean, it's you. You're on the line, and you are your best asset. And there's a reason they give you this amount of money, though. To be clear, when I was talking to Dr. Diaz, he said, it is hard, but there's a way here. Like if you focus and you do right by your patients, and you work and you hustle, this will pay off. You can get through this. You just have to be patient and know you're not going to make a lot of money for yourself at the beginning, and that's okay. It's an investment. And it does pay off. Maybe, going back to your house question, maybe that pays off, it sounds like, but this does pay off if you have the tenacity.
As long as you put in the time, effort, and you have, what are they're like 4 or 5 A's, like you're affable, available, able. You demonstrate you're responsive to the other doctors, your patients.
Accommodating, maybe? I don't know.
Well, I think Dick Lindstrom, he came up with these like 5 A's, but they're very good. Put in the time, and you can do it.
So we talked about all the stuff, but what about the people, right? You mentioned lean practices will have maybe one full-time person. So we should talk about staffing, because you're not just a boss to yourself. You're a boss to people. You're actually running a real business here, and you weren't trained for that in medical school, I'm assuming, unless you got an MBA or some other degree that taught you how to do this. So how do you find staff? How do you retain the staff? And again, how many do you think you might need at the beginning? Any thoughts on that? So I can share what Dr. Diaz and Dr. P had to say, but
I think if you really want to start lean, you start, you do a lot by yourself. And then maybe you hire just one person. If you're really ambitious and you really want to add fuel and jumpstart your practice, you find very talented and capable and knowledgeable, experienced people who know how to build what you want, and you pay them with the understanding that, hey, we're in this together, we're starting from scratch, but I have lofty ambitions. So like I'm following one of my friends on LinkedIn, on social media. He left a practice and starting his own practice, and I can see that he's trying to do this, and that's very ambitious, and that's good. But yeah, it depends on how much hard work and risk you're willing to take. If you want to be real cautious, just hire one person and have them answer the phone and check patients in, and then you do the rest. And you grow organically.
Yeah, so for example, Dr. P, he's hiring a person who does not have experience in ophthalmology, and he will train this person himself and on everything and build them up from the bottom. And that costs less. So that's an advantage, but the trade-off is time and willingness from that person to stick around. Whereas Dr. Diaz, he shared that he hired an experienced practice manager who also had technician skills. So they could do either. They could tech or work up patients, but also understood how to, order enough eyelid speculums or enough Eylea injections or whatever, how to get you onboarded with insurance like that. These are very opposite spectrum kind of ways to start your practice. And yes, there's a premium for that experience. And if they're on board, it can grow. And he's already grown. So he has an optometrist on his staff as well, who's there when he's not there, because he also had another trick up his sleeve. So he's a retina doctor. So he could do sort of like a locum tenens kind of thing. He could show up at another practice, say a cataract and refractive practice, and do retina one day a week for them so that they could help their patients who had problems related to the retina. And then he bounces the next day to another practice. And then maybe the next 3 days he's at his own clinic in-house, but he's renting that space, whether he's there or not. Mm-hmm. So he fills that extra time with his medical optometrist who sees, screens the diabetics and filters them appropriately to the surgeon. So there's all kinds of little tricks, just account for the fact that it's not going to happen right away to get on insurance, to get all the paperwork, all the legalese figured out. It can take months to get those things. So you may not be able to get paid until 6 months after you start this venture.
And if you start solo, you don't have to figure all this out on your own. You can pay consulting companies to assist you and kind of be your consultant, your
Sherpa.
Yes, your Sherpa on do this, do that, and this is a company you should reach out to help you with billing or insurance or credentialing and all that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And billing's a big one. Basically you have to get paid, right? And there's going to be times where insurance is going to say no. You're going to get a denial and it's inappropriate. So you need to be able to fight those denials. And you can either pay your electronic medical record company to do that. Then they'll take a percentage of your billing amount. They'll take like 3 to 6% of everything you generate. So you're losing that. But then again, they can recoup those costs and fight those fights for you. If you're willing to do that later down the line, when you're bigger, you can actually have in-house billing, but then you're paying for that person in-house. So it's hard. It's all, you have to scale it, I guess, appropriately and be humble. I think it's humbling in my mind to have to do all the teching yourself, to do all this stuff. Kind of takes you back to your residency days for me. And that's not a bad thing to do that, but I think it would be tough depending on what kind of doctor you are. I think for cataract and refractive, it would be the hardest because we have so much testing that we have to do. Whereas I think retina and plastics, you could probably, teching is quicker. They don't refract. They don't do IOL measurements. I don't know. What's your impression of that? Do you think the cataract and refractive is the most testing intensive, the most involved from a tech up perspective?
I don't know anything about retina work, but don't they do a lot of testing too?
They do OCT testing, but that's a click. I mean, that's pretty quick. If you're just checking vision pressure in an OCT, that's not bad. But if you're doing vision pressure, OCT, topography, biometry, optos, refracting, all those things I just said, we do that. Our techs do that routinely for patients. So that's like,
what do you think?
3 times more work.
If you were to start out your own cataract and refractive business, would you accept insurance or would you go all cash?
I think if you are like, where, if you're starting out, you finished fellowship in the past 3 to 4 years, you haven't been working in a place and haven't built up your name in a region, I think you should accept insurance. I think if you're older, more established, and you have connections, then you could be more creative and do cash only.
Because I see like family doctors, they transition away from taking insurance and then they go to an all cash model. Isn't that interesting? Like I had to move from one family physician to another, and the new family physician was taking my insurance, but now they're all cash, or they're this concierge thing. So I wonder if that'll, I don't know. I don't know the answers to that.
Well, and I think it depends on what you do. Like
Yeah.
a retina person, really, I don't think could do cash only because they deal
True.
so much with emergencies where
Yeah.
people don't have, you just had a terrifying retina problem. You don't have time or wherewithal to stress about the cost of what's happening to you. You need to get it done. There's no time for that. But if you have a cataract that's been going on for years, you could wait a little bit and get the insurance figured out first before surgery. So I think it's just the context. Family medicine, generally, I don't think there's a lot of emergencies. They can shunt you to an ER, which also doesn't worry. They don't worry about the money. They just kind of worry about that later. And that's okay. I think that's there's harmony in how these different things work. I have not experienced this transition. My parents are going through that where they talk about primary care doctors changing their models and stuff like that. I don't know what that's doing to the quality of care. What's your guess?
I had to do a little math calculation. I said to the family doctor, I go, I'm not sure if I want to pay you $2,000 a year just to have access to you, to have access to your cell phone, email, quicker response times. I mean, we do that without doing that. I mean, on our business card has our cell phone, has our email.
Yeah.
I check email, I answer my cell phone. I don't charge a premium to do that. I just do it because if a person has a question, I'll answer the question.
Yeah.
I don't even charge for that.
Some people do.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's
people
too
do.
much hassle. I mean, what else?
So you're not sure about the quality.
Yeah, my calculation was I don't think, thankfully, that I consume enough primary medical care to justify paying $2,000 a year for whatever it is, and then probably paying more for other things. So I'm probably going to go with a family doctor who accepts insurance.
Yeah, I mean, if you only go once a year, which I think is the average for folks under the age of, I'm going to guess 65, once a year.
I don't know.
Probably, but
I
most
guess-
folks don't go that. Ophthalmology is weird. We have patients come all the time, like for glaucoma or whatever. We see people, retina doctors see a patient 12 times a year, right? Because they'll see him every month for an injection. We're kind of weird. We're outliers. We have a lot higher demands on our patients, but a normal primary care doctor is probably just once a year. So you're maybe paying $2,000 for one visit.
Yeah, I'm okay.
That's
For now.
But for other people, that may be a blessing from God to get this access and a doctor who's genuinely, you get a concierge experience. That may be worth it to them. I don't know. It's interesting.
He gave me a great line. I said,
Yeah.
hey,
Excited.
doctor, I won't mention his name. I said,
Sure.
I'm in pretty good health. I'm mid-50s. I'm not sure I need that level of care yet. He goes, well, at your age, the warranty runs out. Which is a good line. I will say that. It is a good line.
What does he say?
It
to those
almost made me.
40-year-olds? I don't know.
It almost made me go, okay, yeah, I'm going to do it. But
The
I'm not gonna
warranty
do
runs
that.
out. You still have insurance, right? So yeah. Anyway.
Anyway.
That's interesting. I think in my mind, to wrap this up, one thing I talked to them about is how do you actually? Okay, I got my space, I got my equipment, I've got my staff. Now what? Right? You had to actually start. You had to open your practice. How would you go about that? How would you initiate, or before you even get to that point, how would you kind of tee yourself up for that first week of practice, like Dr. P has next week?
I would get all my office well organized. I would have a lot of forms made up within the office to make things streamlined. I would make sure that if a patient were to come in, just like if you open a restaurant, that their experience is smooth. And then that's all. You take care of the internal first. Do I have a chair in every room? Do I have all the equipment that I need? Am I going to have to go hunting and fishing for things when patients come in? And then once I have my house organized, then I would also market externally. So that would be a website that is useful. I'm amazed by other doctors who actually don't have a website. It astounds me. It's a high percentage.
Yeah.
And then I would get good imaging, a professional photographer for myself, my office, my staff. I would make it easy for them to understand what their experience will be like when or if they choose to come see me.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would create all the little social media pages, your Instagrams and Facebooks and
Right.
whatever it is these days, TikTok.
At least I'm
Although
really old.
I'm not on TikTok.
Yeah.
X, we have an X, but it doesn't
Sure.
get much traffic. And that's where I would start. You get your business cards.
Sure.
And then once you have that, you're like a legitimate entity to somebody who can find you over the interwebs.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would formulate a business model to network to potential doctors who might want to refer to me.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of my initial thought.
Yeah, that sounds fair. I mean, I think if I, like my first week, I take a lot of notes. I try to think about everything I missed. Maybe I do a huddle every day or half day.
With your one person?
Seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that we're better in the afternoon than we were in the morning. And maybe I have 2 patients that day. Maybe I have 1.
Mm-hmm.
Still, I'll learn a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I could even ask friends and family to come in just for complimentary care, basically, to run them through an exam. I think that might be worth it because I have time and get their feedback. And I probably wouldn't do a lot of reviews at the beginning, personally, because you're still learning and they're going to feel that. And I would wait. I'd kind of ramp that up later.
What do you mean you wouldn't get a lot of reviews?
I wouldn't focus on getting Google reviews
Okay.
and all this. I wouldn't emphasize that because you're going to have growing pains. And I don't think that I don't think your business should be sunk before it starts because maybe it took too long to get the OCT to work or something and someone's upset about that. I think that could like disproportionately affect the perception of your clinic in an unfair way. Small things that can be magnified because someone's behind a computer screen or a phone leaving a review can have big impact on the way people perceive you from the outside.
I've known people who start practices who they get their friends and family to generate reviews to make their new practice look established.
Sure.
I'm not comfortable doing that personally, but I know that that is done.
Sure. Yeah. Morally, that's gray. I don't know how I mean, if they actually enjoyed it, then that's good. I don't know. Yeah, it's biased. Yeah. You have to make sure their last name doesn't match yours, I guess. I don't.
Yeah.
It has to be a little,
Yeah.
that feels weird to me. When I said have your friends or family come, I wouldn't do that. I would just have them, again, get complimentary care and help me learn better.
Yeah.
Learn more about myself and my practice.
And to get on insurance plans, you're gonna need to apply, and it's gonna take 3 to 6 months to get on most of them.
Yeah.
And some patients will not come see you if you're not on their insurance plan.
Which is fair. I mean, I don't fault them for that.
Yeah.
I think, again, the advantage Dr. Diaz had in that he could be he's a consultant and he would drive hours just to go to some practice in the middle of nowhere, was he could build up money and have this side hustle going on while all the logistics were figured out, instead of sitting dead in the water for 6 months. Your chops get rusty. You haven't operated in 6 months. That's not good. I mean, that's a long time to be away from an OR.
Just because I know ophthalmology, I think, in my uneducated but personal opinion, it's pretty easy, or there is a high demand for retina services due to the frequency of visits that a patient needs to see a retina surgeon for their incurable but manageable eye disease, such as diabetic retinopathy, macular degeneration, things like that. They just need to be seen a lot. So there's a lot of demand for that.
That's an advantage for them,
Right.
for sure. It's tough for cataract and refractive. I think that would be a tough. You could rent space in an existing office. Maybe that's what I would do.
I think
I don't know.
for cataract and refractive, it's very competitive. I don't think it's as easy to get busy. I think it's easier to get That's just my opinion. It's easier to get busy in a retina practice.
Oh yeah.
And I would think it's pretty easy, or it's easier to get busy in certain. I think cataract and refractive is actually the hardest to get busy at within the field of ophthalmology. Like if you're a glaucoma specialist, I would think that it's easier to get busy if you network with other ophthalmologists, because most general ophthalmologists don't want to handle the really bad glaucoma patients, and they'll happily refer.
Yeah.
Same thing for oculoplastics. Same thing for neuro-ophthalmology. Same thing for pediatric ophthalmology. I think there's a excess demand for those services and an undersupply of them.
Yeah, I agree. So there was one other thing that just reminded me of something that I talked about with insurance. I don't know if we face this in Texas, but sometimes they not all are open panel, which means they have enough ophthalmologists on their insurance, and they're like, hey buddy, sorry, we're not going to put you on XYZ insurance plan because we're good. We have enough. And so you have to wait it out until enough room opens up. But if you are some in-need ophthalmologist, like a pediatric neuro-ophthalmologist, they're going to bypass this panel issue because they want these super specialists because they're so rare, they're so needed. So that does give you an edge. Doing that fellowship in XYZ may make your solo practice a little smoother.
Yes. I mean, it hurts me when I want to have a patient seen for a neuro-ophthalmic consult and they have to wait 6 months.
Yeah.
Or same thing for a pediatric ophthalmologist. That's painful. Or even there was an oculoplastic practice in town. It was a 6-month wait, and I go, how do you even stay in business like that? That's like, I would not want to wait. If I needed something done, I mean, maybe this is capitalist me talking, but I would not want to wait 6 months. I would want to get somebody to see me within, let's say, 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's reasonable for non-emergent or issues. Yeah. Right. For urgent issues, I say, or urgent, I define urgent as within 2 to 4 weeks. Emergent, 1 day.
Yeah.
Same day or a day.
Yeah.
Is how I kind of phrase it
for
folks. Like, this is urgent, we need to take care of it, but it's okay if it takes you a couple more weeks to get into the other doctor I'm sending you to, so that they feel like they know the context and they get the bigger picture. We're lucky. I mean, we're lucky and unlucky in Austin. I think this is a big town, but it's also a very small town. Certain services are easier to get into than others. You mentioned this the other night. Retina is great in Austin. It's so easy to get someone to a retina specialist, thank God. But other things are not so easy. And that's no fault of the doctors who do it, to be clear. These super specialists, they're heroes. Like, thank God they do what they do. I'm very thankful to them. It's a tough resource, and not every town has it. I don't know. When I lived in Atlanta or Miami or even St. Louis or Chicago, they have everything in spades. You will have no trouble finding someone to get into.
If you're in Miami or in Chicago or St. Louis and you want to see a neuro-ophthalmologist, how soon can you do it?
Okay, so if I'm in Miami, you go to the ER. So the Bascom Palmer ER, now you're going to see the resident who's on duty, but they're really good at triaging, and they have a neuro-ophthalmology fellow on call 24/7. So when a legit neuro-op thing came in as a sort of practice pattern, I would always run it by the neuro-ophthalmology fellow. So you're getting input from a neuro-ophthalmologist, and all you had to do was sit in an ER for 2 hours. That's pretty incredible. And then I can do an MRI that same night and an MRV, and if I need to send you to the hospital, I do it right there. And then if you need to be seen in clinic, the neuro-ophthalmology fellow coordinates that for tomorrow or next week.
So that's awesome.
Done. So
what about Chicago?
Chicago, there's just so many. There's so many clinics that have neuro. We have Rush, we have UIC, which is a huge ophthalmology residency program. Basically, if you have a large, competent residency program in your town, you're going to have a neuro-ophthalmology team, 1 or 2 of them, and they're very used to taking patients from the ER and getting them into clinic. But in private practice, it's harder, I think, in some ways.
Very cool.
There's a feeder. That's the cheat code. Go through the ER in some places. That's not a guarantee, but if they have a legitimate ophthalmology program and they and you go there and they consult ophthalmology, you're probably in a better place than if you tried to call in and get a clinic appointment. But that just clogs the ER. So I don't want to oversell that, but that is a reality. So if you have an emergency, take care of it. But in Austin, it's a little harder. I think it's tougher here. And I can't imagine what it's like in Tulsa or Shreveport or these smaller places. I don't know how they do it. Okay, so that was, I think, a good summary. I learned a lot. That was an interesting exercise for me. And I wish the best to anyone out there thinking about this. You guys are heroes. I think this is a big task that you're taking on, and go for it. I support it fully. We are constantly being cannibalized by large corporations and private equity, and these folks are like the front lines. They're pushing back against that. So I hope this becomes a trend. I want it to grow. What are your thoughts on that? Maybe not.
Yeah, no,
the
I
opposite
think that,
feeling.
I think that doctors need to learn how to run businesses. I think they should be taught or be required to know basic business skills, basic people management skills, basic leadership skills. I don't know if they're taught any of this stuff. And quite frankly, it's as important to learn this or at least be given an introduction to these concepts that you can teach yourself over your lifetime how to improve on these things, because it's like a secret weapon for any doctor who can do this, whether they're employed or whether they're a partner or they're the head of an organization. Understanding these things is really important. And if you don't know it, just like I said at the beginning, there's a price to pay for everything. You'll pay somebody else who may not have your best interests in mind to do these things. So if you can learn these skills on your own, you're more you'll be able to do better in the long term.
Yeah, while you're describing that, I was thinking if I could go back in time, let's say somehow I knew I was going to do ophthalmology. I didn't, but let's say I was in undergrad or early med school. A lot of places have summers or time off where you might go and shadow a doctor, and I think that's a great experience, seeing the clinical side of things. That should be your meat and potatoes, maybe 70% of what you do, but maybe a less exciting, but maybe in the long term more valuable thing, because you will learn those other clinical skills in med school and residency, would be to spend 30 to 40% of your time with the practice manager doing boring paperwork, because that's the value. There's actual value there.
Yeah, understanding what the practice manager has to juggle on a day-to-day basis, because ultimately, I mean, the practice manager works with, for other people or the doctor who may or may not have an ownership in the practice. And if you don't understand what your staff does, you're kind of at a disadvantage. So it is good to understand what your staff does. Now, I can't, I mean, like, we have our own business, and I don't know exactly what everybody does, but I have a sense of what they do, and I have a certain, respect for what they do. And if push comes to shove, I think we could find somebody who could fill in for a role, because I understand the big picture of their roles and responsibilities and the skill set that's needed. But yeah, management of people, it's super challenging. People are complicated.
For sure. So
I guess that's that.
yeah, I think we should wrap it up for this episode, our fourth episode. Are you ready to do
I'm ready.
our famous?
Born ready.
Okay, ready?
Thank you for seeing eye to eye.
Well, we're getting really good at that.